Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this education session at Chacha 2021. My name is Krishnan, and it is my privilege to be the moderator for discussing this very relevant topic in today's age around the role of parents in their child's education. We've now known for many years, research tells us that parents play a very, very critical role in their child's early education journey. That's not surprising. It's very intuitive as well, right? Like, given that more than 80% of sort of a child's time is spent with their families and broader community and not so much at school. In fact, we also know that the effects of a home learning environment carry on for much later in their child's education journey, right? Like till about even ages of 14 and 16. But at the same time, due to multiple challenges, parents have always taken a bit of a backseat to schools when it comes to education programming globally. This could be due to many reasons, maybe partially because helping parents to support their child's learning is more difficult once children are older. And consequently, what happens is that many interventions involving parents of older children tend to be more focused on providing them information about, say, school quality or encouraging them to just send their child to school, focusing on the economic returns to education and so on, rather than really as an active facilitator of learning. This situation has been rather upended due to prolonged school closures enforced by COVID. Governments as well as non-profits who serve India's poorest children have had to innovate rapidly to ensure continuity of learning at home. Through this effort, many lessons, reflections, and best practices have emerged on how we could involve parents more actively as a teacher, coach, and guide in their child's primary education journey. This panel discussion aims to synthesize the research around this theme, explore some innovations that have been tried in the past year, and summarize reflections on how to re engage parents as key stakeholders. We are very lucky to have panelists who have all explored this theme very deeply and have many nuanced insights to share. Welcome, all of you, and it is my privilege to introduce them to all of you one by one today. I'll begin with Sashwati Banerjee, who's an education practitioner with rich experience. She founded and led Sesame Workshop in India. And recently, in her more recent entrepreneurial stint, she leads Top Parent, an initiative to support parents to participate in their child's education journey. We have Malia Shaukat. Malia is the founder and CEO of Madi Foundation, a nonprofit that works with state governments to design and implement foundational learning programs. And they are now the chief management partner for the FLN mission in Tamil Nadu. Then we have Aziz Gupta, one of those brave folks to start up during the early days of the pandemic. And his organization, Rocket Learning, provides resources to parents of children in government schools, provides them over WhatsApp to enable learning at home. Hopefully, we will also be joined by Professor Vinita Kaul, who's currently experiencing some technical difficulties, but hopefully we should have her with us soon. Professor Vinita Kaul is a professor emerita at Ambedkar University. She set up CCED, the Center for Early Childhood Education and Development, and she's conceptualized and led seminal research around how children in India learn in their early years. Welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Krishnan.
Thanks, Krishnan.
Happy to be here on this very important topic.
Great. So wanted to begin the first round of questions to really frame this issue and understand it a little bit better. And Sasha, I'll sort of would love to begin with you. And wanted to talk about, in your view, we talk about improved parent knowledge and practices around their child's learning. Do you sort of see this as really a means towards just improving child's education outcomes? Or would you argue that this is a goal worth chasing for governments by and of itself?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Krishnan. So I think before I jump into, what should be the role of parent engagement, I think one of the things that is, true is that parent engagement is a very broadly defined term. And depending on who you are asking, people would come up with various definitions. There's enough research and evidence around the world, not so much in the global south, but definitely in the global north, that increased parental engagement does lead to improved learning outcomes in children. And very often these outcomes are really measured in literacy and numeracy indicators. But typically, most parent engagement research uses what we call the bioecological model. It's kind of conceptualized in terms of interactions that happen between, say, a child and its immediate environment and family, and school, or more popular interactions between the school and the family. And for a very, very long time, there was very little done to look at what do you do at the home level. And Krishnan, taking over from what you already mentioned, which is, 80% of a child's time, particularly in the early years, are actually spent at home. So what is, which intervention is actually a more critical intervention around involving parents? It comes with its own set of challenges. But I think one of the more neglected areas have been the fact that what do you do to ensure that children are learning even when they're at home? So there is now some extensive research that has been done that totally kind of looks at going beyond just improvement in literacy and numeracy indicators and play-based activities. And I'd like to mention Lego Foundation, because they do an incredible amount of work and support an incredible amount of projects that really look at fostering that real-time parent engagement, where along with literacy numeracy or foundational literacy numeracy, it really looks at how do you scaffold learning where your overall cognitive development is happening, where you're building resiliency, where you're building socio-emotional learning. And those at the 3 to 8 years age group are very, very critical building blocks, right? Because that's really what takes the child on the future learning journey. And if you're really looking at a generation of learners, to contribute to the global workforce in the future, I think the skill sets that will be required in the coming years are not just, reading at grade level and doing basic math at grade level. It really would involve more executive functioning skills, more socio-emotional skills, and a lot of resiliency, as we have seen. So I think for that reason, I really believe that there absolutely needs to be concentrated effort by government, by organization, by foundations, etc., to really look at how do you support this parent at home. And in this socioeconomic population, we know that parents don't feel, when we did our research, the word they kept using was saksham, ki hum apne aap ko saksham nahi samajhte hain. So they themselves feel challenged. So what do we do to really buffer that up?
Yeah. No, thanks, Ash. I mean, very, very rich comments, I think, based on your experience. And I'm just taking exactly, taking off from where you stopped, want to sort of go across to Malia. And Malia, I know that you obviously had a classroom program and sort of have engaged much more deeply with this issue over the last 18 months. And even more recently, I understand that you had done a very, very extensive survey to understand sort of how exactly parents of government school children are really supporting them at home. Would love to sort of hear from you what the major trends were, specifically what in terms of the trends, what were heartening and what were disheartening. I think that'd be great for the audience to hear.
Thanks, Krishnan. So we did carry out an extensive survey of about 6,000 parents spread across all the 38 districts in Tamil Nadu, and targeted only parents of children attending government schools. I think the one thing that stood out to all of us, and a very, very positive statistic, was that nearly all children want to go back to school. I don't know if they were, making it up so that they didn't seem like they were going to be in trouble if they gave us a different response. But nearly, 90% of parents said that the children seemed keen to go back to school, and almost every day wanted to know when schools would reopen. So a few other, very encouraging points were that teachers continue to keep in touch with children and parents. Nearly 85% of parents said that the teachers were actually calling up on a regular basis and checking up on children, and even if they were not really disseminating a lot of content or worksheets on WhatsApp, there was at least some communication that was happening between the parent and the teacher. So while this might not lead to massive learning gains in that sense, but this at least ensures that the child remains, in the system. Right, there is some emotional connect that the child, that teacher and parent have, that the child remains in the system. And almost, like I said, 85% said that they were extremely happy with the frequency of the touch points between the child and the teacher. The other encouraging fact was that nearly 100% of homes had access to a television, and of that, about 80% of them had access to Kalvi TV. Kalvi TV being the government education channel that the government has launched, and every hour on that channel is dedicated to a particular subject and a particular grade. So it sort of plays through the day, and about there was a lot of awareness about the channel, and out of the 80% that did say that they have access to the channel, nearly 60-70% said that they were actually accessing the content as well. Now, what that leads to, whether that leads to improved outcomes or whether just engagement, we did not measure that, of course. But it was heartening to see that there was at least one avenue that could reach uh, the mass, a vast majority. And if we could invest our energies towards improving the content that was being disseminated on that medium, then it might be worth our while. The not so great points of consideration was that about nearly 70% of parents were not familiar with what their child was learning. I mean, they knew that the child was being engaged, and he or she was receiving some WhatsApp messages every now and then from the teacher or from NGOs that were also sending out these kind of messages. But they could not really point to the fact that my child is able to do this, or my child is being given practice on learning and things like that. So I think whether I think this is a point point to consider, whether schools are open or not, because we just spoke about how parental awareness about their child's learning level is low, and I think this holds true even in a under normal circumstances, right? And I think that is something we certainly need to focus on changing. If as I always give this sort of a slightly more relatable example, a parent generally knows in the first 2 years of a child's life what the physical milestone needs to be, right? A parent will sort of start raising the red flags, say, at month 12, if a child is unable to walk or crawl or do one of those things, right? And if that can become common knowledge and almost get passed on from intergenerationally, why can't we try and replicate that sort of a knowledge transfer for learning also, for basic learning, instead of saying that a parent would know what a child ought to do in the first 24 months. What if we change that to what a parent should know in the first, say, 5 years or 8 years, right? And the other, I think this goes without saying, about 46% of the households reported severe loss of livelihood and income, and that that and others also, we sort of ranked in terms of severe loss to moderate loss to, so severe loss was almost in 50% of the households. And I don't think we can really dismiss or divorce it from the environment the child is surrounded by, and therefore whatever interventions you direct towards the child has to take into account that there has been immense socio-emotional pressure around the child, and the child obviously would have absorbed that. So I think these were some of the stark sort of data points that came through in our survey, Krishnan, and the report will be out soon. We will be putting it out in the social media, so it will have a much more elaborate version of what I've just shared.
Great. No, thanks so much, Molly. I think obviously it's consistent with the fact that demand for education continues to be a theme. Like I mean, parents continue to be engaged in their child's education, directing them to TV. But I think it's really the depth of engagement, almost that you're pointing out, is something that needs to be very consciously built. Would love to sort of go over to Aziz and sort of ask if some of these trends hold. Aziz, you've worked across 3 or 4 very different contexts and geographies, right? Like, so almost broadly, do these trends hold in terms of what you've observed around sort of parent behavior? And again, just to clarify, these are all parents of children studying in government schools, among the poorest in the country, right? Like bottom quartile, for sure. So what would even be some common trends across all of these contexts, and are there very specific context specific behavior changes that even you've noticed?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a vital question, Krishnan, and I think that's in fact over the last year we worked in very different contexts, partly with an eye to understanding some of these differences and similarities. We work in very rural contexts in Uttar Pradesh. We work in sort of semi-urban contexts in Maharashtra, in some districts there, and we work in urban contexts in Mumbai, Chandigarh, Delhi, and so on. We also in fact started working recently in Haryana, which is again semi-rural in some sense, right, relative to say UP. And I think there are how we try to classify behaviors, right, or what sort of defines behavior for parents, right, when they're looking to engage with their children's learning. We call it the AIM framework. So what is the aim for these parents? A stands for awareness and aspiration, I stands for information, and M stands for motivation, right? So we say that this aim has to be there for parents to be able to engage with children. And so in our view, for example, it's very different from just sending content to people, because in a one-way sort of stream, because we feel that's not enough for a low-income child or a low-income family, as opposed to say a high-income child who just has to see information on Byju's and they will learn. I think with parents for learning, we need all of these 3 elements. And the interesting thing is, and this is also connected to penetration in terms of hardware, right? Smartphone and data penetration and all that across these states, which varies a lot. But overall, some elements of AIM are the same and some change. So with A, we call it awareness and aspiration. Interestingly, aspiration is the same across. So completely resonate with Saraswati and Murlia that, aspiration is everywhere, that our kids will only have a better life if they get educated, and that's shown itself in high enrollment, high tuitions, high private expenditure, as far as possible, right? And that persists across these locations. But the awareness part of it, in terms of their awareness and agency of what they can do in their child's learning, is very different. And that is super interesting, right? Even if we have somebody on a WhatsApp group in Chandigarh, who's going to a municipal school in Chandigarh, those parents are slightly higher income. They're still bottom quartile, right? But they're slightly higher income. Maybe they go to houses or they interact with people who are a little bit better off, right? As compared to say someone in UP who's on a farm and so on. We find very different ability of even the mother at the same level of education, in terms of how she thinks about how she can impact her child's learning. Because the content we send is actually video-based, simple activities that you can do. And I would wager that any mother, right, can teach a child how to sort different objects by shape. You don't need to be heavily educated for something like this. But somebody from a rural village in UP finds it much harder to even grasp that concept. And they will say, "Ke, bachche ke pitaji karte hain, right? So my husband will deal with it," as opposed to them doing that. So I think that awareness and agency, even if it has no reality, in truth, right, in terms of being able to engage or not able to engage, that mindset is a very different game, and that's something that we are trying hard to change, and many people are trying to change. Secondly, in terms of information, right, again, I think that is something as well which is a little trickier, especially if you look at technology between different locations. So even if you have a smartphone, if you have a smartphone in a Mumbai versus a smartphone in a rural place in a Haryana or a Maharashtra, or sorry, in a UP, basically I'm much more comfortable opening the smartphone, opening a video or an app, right, and then maybe shooting a video or a photo and sending it back. Right, so just the information of how to access content, how to be able to engage with it and send it back, even there, just the comfort with technology is very different across. So it's not just having technology, it's also having sort of comfort with how to use it, right? And there, in fact, that's one of the reasons why we've chosen WhatsApp as a medium, because relatively people are more comfortable using it than many other things. But even comfort with WhatsApp varies a lot. Finally, if I talk about motivation as a factor, right, and how that I would say is very, very similar across locations, right? Again, stems down to the parents' willingness to really spend time working with their children, and there's a lot that stems from there in terms of communities that you can build. So I think in all these factors, I think agency and comfort with technology, information to impact your child, that varies, but the aspiration and motivation at the back end, right, that is there. And finally, in terms of hardphone and sort of hardware, right, smartphone data penetration, very quick stats, they vary a lot. In Haryana, in UP, we see 40% of government school kids are on these WhatsApp groups, right? We see that in Chandigarh or Mumbai, it's close to 90%. In Haryana, it's 70%, right? So 40, 70, 90, all of that is very, very different. And so technology in our minds, if it impacts, right, probably will deeply impact maybe 20% children in UP, and it will deeply impact, say, 40 to 50% children in a Haryana or a Chandigarh, right? So that variance is going to be there. That said, if you look 5 years ahead, I think this will change a lot. 2 years ago, at an all India level, 30% of government school kids were in families with smartphones. Now that number is 60%. I think if we do the study again 2 years later, especially after the COVID economic shocks, hopefully are behind us, it will be 80%. Right. So I do think that in that way, technology and that impacting the behaviors of parents is going to just become a bigger and bigger factor.
Yeah. Thanks, Aziz. I think obviously, it is a very, very nuanced sort of, we need a nuanced understanding of the problem, right, to attempt to solve it. And I think that's what I think almost all of your answers have brought out, that we need to absolutely, break it down into what are really some of these barriers. And I think which is why I think it's time well spent, the last 20 minutes, to try and even frame this issue really well. I'll encourage the audience at this point of time to start putting in their questions for the panelists. But I'm just going to go ahead and almost sort of move to a slightly different lens of sort of solutions, right? Like, so therefore, what do we do about it? You've all described the problem as it exists today in some form or the other, based on your experiences. Again, Sash, I want to come to you first. And I know that this is an issue that sort of resonates very deeply with you, and you worked on it at length. What sort of messaging has really worked when you've tried to engage with parents, right? Like, both, I mean, in terms of both building their sort of ability, mindsets, all of it. What has worked to nudge parents to sort of play this role?
Um, so, um, so Top Parent is a free app, right? And what we try and do through that app is give parents language, strategies, and resources, multimedia resources that for both parents and kids. So it's an interesting insight actually, because when we launched with the prototype last year, when in April, when COVID hit us, and we ran some A/B tests to determine what kind of message and nudges were really working. We basically found that anything that has a high cognitive overload, parents were just not, taking it. So despite, I think, thinking that, parents want to see a full report card, they want to know what their child is learning, what they're not learning. And when Murlia said that, I was actually smiling to myself, is, parents in this age group, at least in our experience, and we did a research with about 500 odd users, they all weren't interested in knowing what skills their children were learning, what competencies their children had, etc. They basically wanted to know what to do, right? Like, so if we told them, get your child to play on Chimple app for extra 5 minutes because it will improve their number of words, that was a low cognitive overload message that they would really respond well to, right? Instead of telling them, one-on-one correspondence or whatever it is that we had to tell them. So that was one interesting insight we had. I think the second insight we had was that because it is edtech and it is delivered through mobile, and because mobile use is gendered in our country, predominantly the access to a smartphone is in the hand of the father, right, or the male. We had to design different types of messages for both for mothers and fathers, right? Like we couldn't send the same message out to both because we had to engage them in different ways. So in the new version, actually, we've been experimenting a lot more. And we are sending messages via different channels, such as in-app notifications, WhatsApp, as well as an IVRS outbound dialer, more as a support service layer, right? And each of these channels are tailor-made to look at specific type of messages that the channel can house, right? So for IVRS, for example, we use a more like, here's your tip of the week strategy, right? Like we call a bunch of users, it's a voice recording, so we get about 40% hit rate on that. And we basically say, hey, do you know the tip of the week is this, right? And much more to do around early childhood development, right? Like you can do this with your child, or why don't you make food with your child today, etc. Right? Very, very broad and general. The in-app nudges that we do are much more specific to them, to move them to do certain activities. For example, your child hasn't completed the worksheets this month, or hey, you haven't seen this parental video this month, do this to earn more points, etc. And then what we found is that the WhatsApp has become actually a fantastic channel for us, as Aziz said, as a two-way communication, right? Where we are really looking to promote knowledge, information, awareness, and also motivation. So we predominantly also use that channel, to declare our winner of the month, or so and so is the top parent, get them to share their stories with us, etc. So yeah, I mean, I'll stop here. Happy to answer any specific questions.
Thanks, Harsh. Again, I think it's just a very emerging field, right? Like I think there's just so much that more that we need to understand. It's very complicated, on messaging itself, and that's just one aspect of the whole value chain. Thanks so much, Harsh. I want to welcome Professor Vinita Kaul. Hello, Professor Kaul. How are you? Good to have you with us. Can you hear us? Okay.
Can you hear? Yeah. Hi, Krishnan. It's really lovely to be here and to be managed to be here thanks to your colleague Saurabh, because I had some problems with my technology.
No worries, Dr. Kaul. Thank you so much for joining us. I sort of wanted to come to you next, Dr. Kaul. I know, you've done a lot of thinking and research around how children learn in the early years, and obviously the parent is a critical piece of it. One thing at least that stood out to me, even in sort of the seminal IECEI that we did, right, like the first of its kind to show the importance of ECE in India, where you called out almost a specific recommendation around the need for generating demand for developmentally appropriate early learning among parents. Would love to hear directly from you on sort of why this is important and how can we do this, right? Like how do you even generate demand among parents for quality early learning?
Yes, you're very right. That I think my experience and the research finding very clearly indicates that it's it's an interplay of supply and demand. Because the demand it informs supply, and the supply doesn't necessarily always inform demand. So you have to work on the demand side factors. And I think what it really, to explain why that is so important, is because, as Sashwati was saying a minute back, she was talking about the parents not really understanding what is one-to-one correspondence, or even being able to really get the messages that we want to give them, which are technical, or even something which are not familiar to them. Because one of the problems in early childhood education has been that education has been perceived in a very narrow way in terms of literacy and numeracy. So, what does an average parent understand of early childhood education? So, if Sashwati was to say that this will make the child learn A, B, C, D, or learn 1, 2, 3, 4, that would immediately they would relate to that. But to be able to tell them that that will make the children play, and through play they will learn, that is not in their psyche at all. So what happens as a result, the research has shown that there is a huge migration to the private schools. across the country, even in the remotest of areas. And why is that happening is because any parent now, of course, they may be a backward, which of course is a different issue because of the COVID. But why that happens is because the parents have a certain perception of what is good quality education, which actually our research shows is the reverse. Now, I'm talking about the more affordable private sector and the kind of schools that we've encountered in the rural and tribal areas, that very often they are actually doing counterproductive work. But then parents believe that that is what is right, and so ultimately school choice, parental choice for schools for their kids is very much dependent upon that. So you may be doing the best developmentally appropriate program in the village or in the district, even for that matter, but there will be no takers because everybody is following the crowd. So that is what is there. So unless we really are able to create the demand, influence the demand through educating the parents about what is good quality education for their younger children, our efforts will not bear fruition. So that is the reason for that.
Got it. No, thank you, Professor Kaul. I think a very, very important lesson. I think that's almost the beginning of this value chain, right? Like even before sort of maybe talking about messaging, it's almost like generate demand and then sort of almost
Absolutely.
tailor the messaging
Create an
appropriately.
enabling environment for whatever reform we are thinking about.
Great. No, thank you so much, Mr. Call. And just going a little bit further down the value chain, right? Like, further after messaging and actually sort of reaching the parent itself, right? Like talking about distribution. And that's where I really wanted to get some insights from you, Aziz. Specifically, you've extensively used WhatsApp, which seems to be ubiquitous. The question really is it as ubiquitous as it seems? Use of WhatsApp. Does it come as intuitively to parents? And what have been some sort of advantages and downsides of using that as really the primary medium to reach out?
Right. Yeah, Krishnan, I think, the reason why we chose as a design choice to try to disseminate information and content for learning, right, through and behavioral nudges through WhatsApp was with a desire to meet the user, right, the user we're working with, who is the low income parent, where they are, right, and to also help them with what they already know. So I think that was a big thing in our mind, and so we decided. I mean, what we call it is this sort of, we have a low tech front end, right, which is WhatsApp, and that's linked to a sophisticated back end, which actually makes sense of WhatsApp and is able to send customized content and nudges and feedback to the user. So that's what we've been doing. In terms of the advantages, right now we are actually on around 20,000 WhatsApp groups with 200,000 users, right, and the advantages that we are seeing. And there are disadvantages as well. So I'll come to those. But the advantages are that they are actually, WhatsApp is on every smartphone. So if you have a smartphone, then you pretty much have WhatsApp. We've done a lot of surveys on it, but even in practice, that's what we're seeing. That drop off from smartphone to having WhatsApp on your smartphone is next to negligible. Second is that we also believe strongly in having peer groups of parents and how they can support each other. And I think WhatsApp as a distribution channel has worked perfectly for that, because the group feature is very powerful in WhatsApp. It's what users are used to as well. Right. And so the easy onboarding of users onto groups, which teachers can do very, very effectively, right? Because everyone knows how to add a user to a group, is there. And then using it in the form of a group is there. Thirdly, there's a great push notification. I mean, WhatsApp is the best push notification, right? I mean, you don't need to send anything else. You get that screen. Everyone is anyway checking it all the time, which has been helpful. And then the teacher is there, which I think is critical. Right, the teacher is there live. They can see what is happening. They can engage with that. They can give feedback to that, rather than having to wait for some information that comes to them, or rather than have to go on some separate dashboard. Right, and I think they get feedback from community direct time, and the community also sort of sees that they get information from the teachers in real time. Right, so I think those are advantages. Disadvantages are there, right? You don't get as much data as you would in an app. You don't know how long somebody is spending on a particular thing. You don't know, were they stuck on this particular question or not, right? So I think that is a challenge. And with our technology at the back end, we've been able to overcome some of that, because we can at least track responses and other things on those WhatsApp groups, and we encourage parents to send back responses. Second disadvantage is that apps are considered just fundamentally more fancy. Right, so there may be many governments who may say we would like our own app, right? And maybe even parents might consider that, okay, this app is really cool. But overall, in our minds, I think WhatsApp has been a good distribution channel, and it's hard enough to get parents to have that behavior change to do activities with learning at the low income. It's even harder if you force them to adopt a new technology, right? In some sense, or you ask them to adopt a new technology, and maybe it'll take a little bit more time in that way. But overall, I feel though that, I mean, distribution layer aside, right? I think there are fundamental set of things that are important to get parents to do some set of things, right? Which is peer effects, teacher being involved, two-way accountability and motivation. That can happen through apps as well, honestly, over time. And I think the more important thing in my mind is actually not just the distribution layer, which is great, but making sure that these aspects are covered in whatever you have, whether it's an app, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's Facebook Messenger, or anything else that could be used.
Thanks, Aziz. And almost sort of you've almost laid out even the platform for Malia, right? Like so tried, I think, multiple modes of reaching parents. Through sort of combination of physical, digital, and everything in between. I would say. So would love to understand, Malia, some of your reflections on some of this, and also more broadly, would, let's say, once schools reopen, are you actively thinking of evolving your classroom program to almost integrate some of these parent facing measures into the program itself, and how would you do that?
Thanks, Krishnan. So yes, we did get very desperate, and I think we obsessed over the fact that we will not leave any child behind, right? And data for Tamil Nadu, in fact, the data doesn't. I'm actually quite surprised about the numbers being 80 and 90% in some states, because Tamil Nadu is generally considered to have very high penetration of smartphones and internet, and we saw that there was only about 50 close to 50% of penetration of smartphones with working internet on it. So I think for us it was inconceivable that we would leave 50% out, right? And it's not like we could reach every single child effectively, but we still gave it a shot. So we did, what we called the phygital model, which is that we actually sent out physical learning resources to every household. We did WhatsApp, we did IVRS, we did SMS, so what have you, right? And I think it was also a good thing to have done. This was done during the first wave, and we're rolling out the second phase now. But just immense learning from having tried different things and to sort of zero in on what works best, and being in a place where now, given our association with the state government, to be able to hand over those learnings to say that this is what we've tried and this is what has worked, and having that influence policy in the future as well. Because I think it's not just NGOs that need to start thinking about parent interface. Governments need to start thinking about parent interface more strongly, right? So far you've had your SMCs and PTAs and whatnot, and it's been sort of an arm's length relationship with the parents. And I think as paranoid as I might seem, you cannot rule out third waves and fourth waves, and pandemic not subsiding anytime soon. So you have to take into account that you have to build that channel between the parent and the school, and governments need to start thinking about it. And we hope to be able to influence that, at least in Tamil Nadu, where the department is investing quite heavily in building that parent interface, and building also into the classroom program. Obviously, the hope is that schools will reopen, children will come back to school, and we'll have a great return to school and all of that. But if that were not to happen, and if the only learning resource that most children have is the book that the government provides, is the textbook, as these research would say that low-income households barely have any other reading material or learning material at home, right? So even when we did the survey, 100% of children had the textbook with them. So what we are planning to do is build a lot of these home learning content into this textbook itself, so at least the child has some access to learning content. And I think the aim is going to be to retain the child's level. I think we can all agree that beyond a certain point, you cannot drive up learning outcomes with home learning programs, right? I mean, to a certain age, at least the younger age groups, there is learning in the academic sense is not as critical from a parent's lens as it is for later years. So in later years, you from a home learning perspective, we'll hope to retain those learning levels rather than drive them up, and really build it into the FLN mission, the state FLN mission. So we are not divorcing the house from the school, at least not for the next 2 years, and really pushing the system to think about how we can integrate it. And I also mentioned that mass media seems to have that reach, and investing in improving that quality of content even on the mass media channels, I think will be worth investing our time and effort into. So yeah, definitely looking to bring that parent lens into all our interventions going forward.
No, great to hear that, Malia. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes, and I'm quickly moving on, to take a few questions from the audience. And it is, in fact, one of the things that Malia briefly mentioned. In fact, wanted to direct this to Professor Kaul, who's probably seen the evolution of SMCs in India over a period of time, right? Like the questions around sort of, are they really effective? I know we've used them mostly for as governance measures, decentralized governance primarily, but can we use leverage SMCs to get the parent to play a more active role, or at least shape the demand, as you were saying earlier?
Well, I think that I can go back to my experience of a project when I was with the World Bank, which we did in Madhya Pradesh, in the Ratlam district, where we learned a lot about the SMCs, because we actually worked with some in the tribal areas with some of the SMCs there, and we found many things which I just would like to highlight to draw upon what works, what makes SMCs work. Two, three things that came up very starkly were: one, that we expect SMCs to do a lot of things, take responsibility for a school, but we do not prepare them adequately. We do not create in them the confidence to be able to engage with the school system or with the education system. So what we found was a complete lack of confidence. It took us 2 years to be able to bring them to a point where they could talk with the officials. So that was one point. The second point was that they were not enabled. There was this whole thing about school-based planning, but there was no money accompanying those plans. So they did some kind of school development plans, but then they were not of any. They made no impact because they were not operationalized, because there was so again it's a lack of a comprehensive planning. And the third point was that they need time. So they should be they should be kind of handhold it a lot through to be able to really be able to hand over the kind of responsibility to the school management committees. Most of the time we found in our experience that people did not even know that they were members of the school management committees. So that was the reality across the country. So to that extent, it needs a lot of intensive engagement with them to be able to enable them. But also, I think it is very important, because very often parents are seen as members of the committee, that the parents need to be provided. And this is not only for school management committees. Since time is short, I just want to add one point to it. For parenting in general, because we expect a lot of parents, and COVID has thrown up the importance of parenting. I think it is very important. We must enable the parents to be create an ecosystem for them to be able to engage with children, because we have seen that it creates a lot of parenting overload for children. For if the school system starts expecting the parents to do a lot of work, so somewhere parental support measures are also required from the government, if the government is going to get the parents to take in a more active role. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you, Dr. Kaul. I'm just going to take one other question around sort of, and maybe can request maybe I can direct it to Sash. In fact, on sort of in your opinion, do you see the current role of sort of parents as educators? Do they see it as something temporary while schools are shut? Will this disappear once schools reopen? What are you sensing from the parents that you work with?
The parents that we are working with definitely don't see themselves as educators. They really don't. I think everyone will agree, whoever's working in early childhood and with low income populations, I think what Aziz had mentioned earlier, which is the fact that there is a certain amount of aspiration, right? And there is an inherent understanding that education is a ticket out of poverty. Vinita touched upon the fact that that doesn't necessarily lead to them understanding what kind of quality education is really going to be a ticket out of poverty for them, right? The system is not kind of supporting that in whichever way or form. A lot of the parents, you know, have lost their livelihoods. They're going through a very, very tough time. But even if there was no pandemic, consider the fact that in India, almost 70% of kids in the 3 to 5 age group are not attending or do not attend any high quality early childhood program, right? So, given that basic fact, parents don't see themselves as educators. In their head, it's very clear boundary that education means school jana, tuition jana, and everything else we teach them, right? We can teach them values and moral things and respect and well-being, right? They feel कि but हम बच्चे को ये सिखा सकते हैं, पर स्कूल जाना बहुत जरूरी है बिकॉज स्कूल में वो टीचर और ट्यूशन टीचर उनको पढ़ाई सिखाते हैं. So that's why that shift in minds, in the mind space of getting the parent to understand, giving the parent the support and the knowledge, I think is very critical. And it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, right? Like this is the key behavior change that needs to happen over a period, so that at some point in time parents understand, right, that they can teach kids shapes at home through activities or colors at home through activities, and they can be fun and they can be play based and they can be imaginary and they can be creative. But otherwise, I don't think, predominantly, I don't think they see themselves. I think Krishnan, we've lost, right?
Yes, seems to be. Can
So
I just
Aziz
one little intervention? I think what is very important is to respect the fact that parents are parents and teachers are teachers, because expecting parents to be teachers is not realistic nor not desirable. What we need to be working in our parenting programs is to really bring the school home and curriculum together, the school curriculum together, and being able to see what parents can do best, because especially in early childhood, learning is much more holistic, and there is a lot that parents need to be doing in terms of language development, of getting children to think, in terms of asking them what they did in their school, giving value to what they are learning. So all that would be much more important from the parents' point of view, which they can do much better, rather than expecting them to take on the teacher's role.
Absolutely, Dr. Kaul. And I think, you've obviously advised us on similar things in the past, and I remember that very clearly. But I think the good thing also is, and to the question that Nisha asked in the chat as well, that at least when we've surveyed a lot of parents, right, who are currently doing activities with the children who were not doing earlier, many of them do indicate that they would continue to support children in this sort of learning, right, in different ways, even post-pandemic as well, right? So I think sort of like sniffing blood in some ways, and hopefully, and especially now this habit has hopefully been there for a year, so it's relatively harder to break. At least that's I think our hope, and I think that's a bet that governments should also put their money on and their time on in terms of continuing to engage with parents. Krishnan, we were just filling time while you were disconnected.
So, thank you so much, and apologies for the disconnect in between. No, so just want to quickly wrap up, and I know we're sort of overshooting time. Would love to sort of get one key message from all of you. A very sort of a sharp and concise message, if I may, to sort of anyone trying to design a sort of a program or an intervention to specifically involve parents as part of their child's learning in the early years. And if I, given the time constraint, if I may even say 10 words or less, what would that message be to anyone trying to do this? Maybe I'll come to Malia first.
Um, I think under no circumstances should we give up on our vision of reaching every child. I understand as organizations we have constraints for which we design programs in a way that we do, but I think there is almost a moral compulsion on at least governments to not limit their interventions to just edtech and say that we've signed up for a WhatsApp program and that sort of where our responsibility towards engaging children ends. So I would say, do not give up on the last mile child. Raise as many questions, listen to their constraints, and be sensitive to the constraints. I'm sorry that was more than 10 words, Krishnan, but
No,
I
thank you,
yeah.
Malia. Yeah, no, got the gist of it. Dr. Call.
Uh, I think schools and parents must see themselves as partners in the education of their children, and that partnership should be seen in terms of complementing each other and not adversarial, as is normally seen.
Thank you, Dr. Call. That's crisp and I think very, very insightful. Sash, over to you next.
Um, I have two phrases, right? One is that I believe that there is no silver bullet and that we really need a variety of solutions to ensure that we are doing justice in what is a
Mhm.
very, very critical issue in this country. And I think my second recommendation would be for people who are looking to work in this area is really know your audience. Very often we don't know whom we are talking to, and therefore, what is the right thing to lead with, and how do you really kind of shift those behaviors?
Got it, Sash. Very powerful. Know your audience. I think something for all of us to take away on this. And Aziz, finally to wrap up with you.
Yeah. I think what I would say is that household effects work. Research shows that earlier governments have not been able to engage with households or were not expected to. Now they are. So please continue doing that, and maybe that is what will give the credibility back to the government schools that they have lost to the private school space in the past. So use it as an opportunity in that way. And finally, don't give one-way content. Don't give gyan or prachar. Please engage in a two-way mechanism where you build motivation, peer effects, and actually figure out how to work rather than just being lazy and pushing content either through a textbook or through an app or WhatsApp. Figure out how to do it properly.
Got it. Thanks so much, Aziz, taking away the equality, so to speak, of communication from that as the main theme. Thank you to all of you. We've sort of exceeded by a couple of minutes, partly due to my unfortunate power cut in the middle. But I think just to summarize, I think it's abundantly clear of the criticality of the role and sort of the interest of parents to also do this. But I think as a country, we need to continue to innovate to find the right solutions in terms of enabling and engaging parents to play this facilitator role in their child's education. I think that much is abundantly clear, and I hope that all of you and all of us listening in continue to do that, and push the bar and push the thinking on this issue. Thank you for listening, all of you, and hope to see many of the audience back tomorrow when the education track resumes at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
Bye.
Krishnan.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil.
So much.